India and Africa are bonded together by the people-to-people, civilizational and cultural contacts that go back many centuries. This unique alliance, transcending geographical barriers, achieved a new impetus with the Afro-Asian Conference in the Indonesian city of Bandung in 1955. Bandung established a new platform for partnership between the developing and the newly independent nations of Africa and India. India's first Prime Minister Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru symbolized the Bandung spirit by working tirelessly to forge a special relationship between India and Africa. Ever since, this historic partnership has strengthened, with both India and Africa traversing on the same path, with shared values and cherished shared dreams. This unique bond has brought about social transformation and overall development. A full 50 years before Bandung, father of the nation Mahatma Gandhi's struggle for racial equality in South Africa had already captured the imagination of a whole generation of African leaders like Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana, Julius Nyerere of Tanzania, Leopold Senghor of Senegal, Kenneth Kaunda of Zambia, Sam Nujoma of Namibia, Gamal Abdel Nasser of Egypt, and above all, of Nelson Mandela of South Africa. When conflicts broke out in several newly independent countries in Africa, India was amongst the first to contribute troops to the UN peacekeeping operations. The Indian Blue Helmets have earned laurels for their contribution in Democratic Republic of Congo, Sudan, Somalia, and elsewhere on the continent. An all-women police contingent is helping our friends in Liberia in restoring law and order following the long civil war. The Golden Jubilee of Bandung Conference was commemorated in April 2005, where the new Asia-Africa Strategic Partnership, aimed at boosting economic and political relations and facing the challenges of globalization, was signed by 106 countries from the two regions. The emergence of Ghana as an independent country was followed in quick succession by a host of others. The struggle for independence and racial equality befittingly culminated in South Africa, the very land that shaped the Mahatma with the end of apartheid regime. Following the example set by Nehru, every subsequent government in Delhi stepped up the campaign against colonialism and apartheid. Africa's cause became India's passion.
India's friendship and solidarity with Africa is very well documented. It's time-tested. It's a relationship which is based on trust, mutual respect, and a spirit of friendship. It is different and distinct from Africa's engagement with any other country or India's engagement with any other continent. It cannot be compared with the engagement of others who may be now on a journey to look for Africa. For us, we have known each other for a long time. In the contemporary context, this relationship is important both economically and politically. Africa has its resources, and the richness of that is bound to usher in an era of development and prosperity for the people of Africa, in particular Sub-Saharan Africa.
At the NAM Summit in 1986, the then Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi launched the Africa Fund, an acronym for Action for Resisting Invasion, Colonialism and Apartheid. The India-Africa Forum Summit, held on April 8 and 9, 2008, started at the initiative of Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, was an attempt to deepen the engagement between India and the African continent. The first summit, held in New Delhi, focused on food security, agriculture, health security, pandemics, energy security and clean technologies. there is indeed a willingness to work together for finding solution to these challenges.
I am happy to announce a duty-free tariff preference scheme for least developed countries on the occasion of this summit. We will enhance opportunities for African students to pursue higher studies in India. As an immediate measure, we propose to double our long-term scholarships for undergraduates, postgraduates, and higher courses, and increase the number of training slots under our technical assistance program from 1,100 to 1,600 every year.
India unilaterally agreed to provide preferential market access for exports from all the 50 least developed countries, 34 of which are in Africa. It offered lines of credit amounting to $5.4 billion to undertake projects in different African countries. It doubled long-term scholarships for students and promised to usher in green revolution in Africa through holistic capacity building in agricultural production, storage and transportation.
Right throughout, we have been a friend of the freedom of the African countries. We have been there as an ally, as a well-wisher, and even as a passionate advocate from before a majority of the countries in Africa were independent. So our history is one we're very proud of, that we have in a sense not just been right, if you like, on the important questions of Africa, but we have taken the stand early and not when it became safe or convenient to do so. We've even taken the stand when it was unpopular with influential countries that were still colonial powers or occupying powers in those regions. And I must say that many African leaders have appreciated this. In my meetings with them, the message I get is, you have been our friend for a long time. You, as India, are seen differently because we know that you stood by us when we needed people to stand by us.
India invests in building up the lives of the younger generation and bringing together the people of India and Africa. In fact, several African students come to India for training in web designing and English-speaking courses.
This course has improved my communication skills and the IT as well.
India is one of the best countries which is able to communicate their skill to other countries like Sudan.
India's strategic global engagements depend much on its strong relations with Africa. For a much deeper engagement with these countries, India is actively interacting with regional and sub-regional groupings like Southern African Development Community, SADC, Common Market for Eastern and Southern Africa, COMESA, Economic Community for West African States, ECOWAS, Southern African Customs Union, SACU, and East African Community, EAC, in Africa. India is actively engaged with these groupings to ensure that their common goals are translated into reality, helping the two to leverage their position in the international fora. In recent times, trade between India and Africa has been growing at an annual rate of 25%. In October 2006, a CII-sponsored conclave on India-Africa Project Partnership in New Delhi attracted more than 750 delegates and produced business deals worth $17 billion. Subsequently, the CII followed it up in 2007 with a series of regional conclaves held in Uganda and Mozambique that drew representatives of the public and private sectors from a total of 42 African countries to meet with their counterparts from India. The India-Africa Project Partnership 2010 conclave held in New Delhi aimed at developing synergies and creating a new vision. As one of the world's fastest growing economies with a GDP that has crossed $1 trillion, India seeks to forge closer economic partnership with its friends in Africa. Technologies and practices developed in India in areas ranging from agriculture and small industries to banking and microfinance to IT and remote sensing can be uniquely suitable for African needs.
Africa is very much like India. India, you see very high technology areas and you see very low technology areas, because we are a developing country. Africa is a developing continent. Africa needs products that are used in India, because we, Indians are very ingenious, and we can adapt. So what we say, Indian companies say, is we will provide you with what we call, in Kirloskar Brothers, we call AAA technology. That's adaptable, appropriate, and affordable.
This partnership is sustainable, dynamic, constantly evolving, and moving forward. Multifarious investments are made in projects like railways in Angola, an IT center in Ghana, buses in Congo, power projects in Sudan and Gambia, a major irrigation project in Senegal, floriculture and sugarcane production in Ethiopia, pharmaceuticals and telecommunications in South Africa, and much else. Indian companies are now amongst the largest investors in countries ranging from Mauritius and South Africa to Ethiopia, Sudan, and Ghana.
There are many large Indian companies operating in Africa. I think Tata's have huge operations, mainly in Southern Africa, to the best of my knowledge. I know the A.V. Birla Group has a wonderful company which is really a role model for industry in Egypt. And so across Africa, you will see, in Ethiopia, you will see Indian companies who engage in rose farming. So, it's a diverse lot of people or companies from India that are currently operating in Africa.
It is critical that we build business synergies of each of the African countries. So, West Africa with Nigeria as an anchor, Central Africa with Congo as an anchor, and East Africa with Kenya as an anchor, and Southern Africa with South Africa as the anchor. These are 4 anchors, along with great countries around each one, with whom we must have a deep business, cultural, intellectual, social, empowering relationship.
Recently, Africa hosted 2 major summits. The Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, CHOGM, which represents both the developing and the developed world, was hosted in Kampala in Uganda in 2007. For the first time, India's Kamlesh Sharma was elected CHOGM Secretary General. Similarly, the Non-Aligned Movement Summit, representing South-South Cooperation for Development, was hosted at Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt, which came out ever more united to meet the challenges of the new millennium.
The relationship between India and Africa is a timeless one. We have evidence of prehistoric ties between the African continent and the early civilizations in India. In modern times, we have had a very, very interesting relationship where Indians emigrated from the subcontinent to Africa and played an important role in trade, commerce, nation building in different countries there. The freedom struggle in India was sparked off by Satyagraha with Mahatma Gandhi, the father of the nation, ignited in South Africa. And I think ever since the non-aligned movement, the struggle against colonialism, imperialism, racism, Indians and Africans have marched in step.
Prime Minister Manmohan Singh visited Nigeria in 2007, which is the largest democracy in Africa. During his visit, Prime Minister Manmohan Singh addressed the Nigerian Parliament. Both countries are rapidly growing economies, with Nigeria being India's largest trading partner in Africa. The strong bonding between India and Africa is reflected in the Delhi streets that were named after Africa and African leaders like Africa Avenue, Kwame Nkrumah Marg, and Nelson Mandela Marg. The latest interaction between the G8 countries representing the developed world and the G5 countries of India and South Africa, along with China, Brazil and Mexico, representing the developing world, signifies not only the South-South cooperation, but also the North-South dialogue. The partnership between India and Africa aims to address the concerns of the developing world in the areas of climate change, WTO negotiations and the global economic slowdown. This was in evidence during the Copenhagen summit, where India and Africa acted in tandem on the issue of climate change.
In the WTO, our quest is a common one: That is, to ensure that the present round of negotiation succeeds, since it is dedicated to development. So the legitimate aspirations of the poor and developing countries have to be met, and a fair and equitable global trade regime should come in place, which corrects the historical imbalances in global commerce, which has been there for a long period of time, and those imbalances have been weighed heavily against the developing countries or the poor countries.
Just as in the past, in the 21st century too, India has a vision for partnership with Africa. The Pan-African E-Network project, which supports tele-education, telemedicine, e-commerce and e-governance, is a vivid example of the possibilities. 47 African countries have already signed up for this ambitious project that places India's capabilities in medicine, education, IT and telecommunications in the hands of all African states.
It is a major leap in tele-education and telemedicine, where universities in Africa have been linked to major universities in India, hospitals in Africa in different parts to super specialty hospitals in India. And this project is a gift to the people and the government of the Republic of India.
Skill development is another area of close cooperation. India shares with African women the expertise in generating electricity from solar energy. At the Barefoot College in Tilonia, near Ajmer in Rajasthan, more than 30 African women are busy acquiring the specialized skills, which will go a long way in electrifying their respective villages in Africa.
When Africa looks at India, they see a country very much like them. They see a country that has recently overcome some of the same problems they are currently facing. They see a country with which they have cultural affinities, ways of doing business, social contacts are easy, and in many levels they find that when they're dealing with India, they're dealing with something that is accessible and familiar. And as a result, I find there is a certain warmth in their dealings with us, this cuts across the board, whether it's Francophone Africa, Anglophone Africa, West Africa, East Africa, Southern Africa. We're seeing this kind of attitude right across the sub-Saharan continent. And my own view is this is something that we should be very proud of. We don't go in as some sort of big, gigantic, remote governmental process. Our government actually serves in many ways as a front-loading vehicle for private sector. We encourage private sector partnerships. I go to an African country, I'm carrying a business delegation of 13 to 15 people with me. They then have contacts with their own counterparts in the African ministries. So what you're seeing in this process is a process of accessible give and take.
Whether in the field of foreign services or politics, India and Africa work closely in mutual cooperation. Parliamentary delegations from African countries frequently visit India. Training is imparted to parliamentarians and parliamentary officials who learn from the Indian parliamentary experience, which they gainfully use in the discharge of their parliamentary work in their own countries.
I was impressed with the 0 hours as well as the procedures concerning the electronic voting system in the Indian Parliament. And I think that Zambia and Africa as a whole has a lot to learn from India, which is actually the world's biggest democracy.
In Seychelles, we follow the presidential form of government, whereby there's very strict separation of powers between the 3 branches of government, which is the executive, the legislative and the judiciary. And I hope perhaps adopt some of the practices that India follows.
At the Foreign Service Institute, foreign diplomats are imparted training in Indian foreign policy and culture. Besides, the course includes modules on diplomacy, human rights, terrorism, international trade, climate change, strategic affairs and security issues, and developing negotiation skills.
I enjoyed the part where we talked about India and Africa and how India sees herself in Africa, the Indian agenda in Africa that was really interesting as compared to other players in Africa like China, the Western countries. It was very interesting to hear something about different about India. I think one of the speakers that was yesterday or the day before yesterday, he said that India is not in Africa just to siphon the resources of Africa, but it's there to build the capacity of the African. And that was very important.
I wish that one day I'll come back as a diplomat, because the two previous officers from Ghana who participated in this program are here as diplomats. Yeah, they're actually working here, the two. So I also, whether it's by design or by accident, I expect to be here sooner than later.
At the end of the visit, they not only learn a lot about India, but also provide rare glimpses into the rich and varied culture of Africa that casts an enduring spell.
The best thing I like about India is the culture. You still retain your culture. When you come to the office, people are in sari, you know, it looks so nice. Yeah. The culture is still there. It is still rich.
Likewise, the ICCR organizes cultural shows of the African students, which help the youth to understand each other in a better way. With the UN reform high on the Indian agenda, India seeks the support of African countries for overall reforms, including democratization and expansion of the UN Security Council, both in permanent and non-permanent categories. The support of African countries is crucial for India's bid for a permanent seat in the UN Security Council.
We have had a lot of understanding from Africa for our candidacy for a non-permanent seat on the Security Council, and many African countries are very sympathetic to our case for a permanent seat. But on that, though Africa and India share a common view that reforms are necessary in the UN Council, Africa is still waiting for a consensus to be formed within Africa before they can give us the explicit support that we crave and that we believe we will get from many of them.
History, politics, economics, finance, technology, education and culture. The threads that bind Africa and India are endless. Propelled by a strong political will on both sides, the bonds are growing stronger. The relationship is acquiring new and fresh dimensions. The goal is common: to light up the lives of 2 billion people that inhabit our lands.